Greetings viewers, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're back on the $300 Outback SUS. I've already got the engine back in it, got it running, got all the fluids topped up, all that's good. Unfortunately I did that off camera and did not film the reinstallation of the engine nor getting it back up and going with oil and coolant burping and all that stuff, but we've covered it in plenty of videos in the past. So in today's video we're going to be working on suspension. As you saw in this video, everything wrong with the car. We found that the lower control arms were torn, which is a common issue on 2005 and newer chassis. We found that the sway bar end links were clunking and loose and original and need to be replaced. And the ball joints were bad. We've already covered that in another video right here on the Astro Subaru ball joint puller. I changed the ball joints in that video. Today we're going to be removing and replacing the control arm bushings with some genuine Subaru control arm bushings, and we're going to be replacing the sway bar end links with an aftermarket part, because this is going to be a flip vehicle. I'm not keeping it myself. We're not putting genuine Subaru parts on everything, so we're going to use some Moog sway bar end links for front and rear sway bar. There's also a few other things that we need to address. A missing bolt from the front wheel bearing hub assembly. Well, not missing, there was one put in it, but it's the incorrect one. It's too short. I want to go ahead and put a genuine back in it, have that ordered. Also missing the brake shield for the right front, if I recall correctly. So need to find one of those, either pull it off of the 2005 Legacy GT or order one. That said, let's go ahead and get into pulling off the suspension components and replacing the bad components. All right, so we need to get our end links loose. We also need to drop this lower control arm so we can change that rear bushing. 5mm hex in the center to hold, and a 14mm on the outside to turn the nut. Hopefully I'm not completely blocking you guys' view. And it is getting kind of late in the afternoon, so hopefully it doesn't get dark on me. Again, this is not a DIY step-by-step. I've covered these repairs in depth on other videos, which I can link in the description or put up in cards. These boogers are never easy to get to come loose. Well, let me rephrase that. On northern cars like this one, it was not an original southern vehicle. A bunch of corrosion and junk gets in there and gums that hole up. But work our RBRT 5mm hex in there. And sooner or later we'll get a bite. Last night I soaked these down in penetrating oil and PB Blaster, so a lot easier to get them off right now. Did the driver passenger side yesterday, and didn't happen to film it because I got so aggravated with these sway bar end links. One thing really nice about the Moog sway bar end links, other than the fact that they have a serviceable grease fitting top and bottom, is that you don't have to worry about those stupid little hexes to hold them, to keep them from slipping. You've got flat spots back here to hold it with a wrench. So all you need is a wrench and a socket to install them rather than a hex bit in the center to keep it from turning on you. So you got a 17mm bolt and nut there, and you got two 19mm headed bolts and a 19mm headed nut, or a 19mm nut. Back here to get the control arm out. And out comes your control arm. So now we can go ahead and remove the old torn up bushing and install the new one. All right, so control arm and the cruddy old control arm bushing. Snap on BJP1. Ball joint press set with the BJP1 BKS Subaru control arm bushing adapter kit. And our Milwaukee M18 fuel mid-torque impact 22mm socket. Get everything lined up. And once we're lined up, we can let her eat. And just like that, out comes our old bushing. Easy as pie, focus. And now we can drop in our brand new Subaru bushing, which is pretty easy. It's just the reverse of the removal. You just got to make sure you orientate the control arm bushing in the correct orientation. I'll try to put a diagram on the screen, but this big nub here, it's facing up when oriented into the car, and this nub and this nub make a straight line across the control arm towards the hole for the ball joint. And that's basically all you've got to do to install it correctly, is make sure you orientate it, have it oriented the correct way, and drive her back in same way it came out. And bam, just that easy. Already reinstalled, ready to bolt back on the car. All right, now the control arm just goes back on the way it came off. Only tightening these up snug, we gotta have the full weight of the car on the suspension before we can fully torque it to the final torque spec. Don't worry, that wasn't full blast with the impact. That was only power mode 2, so still plenty to go for final torque. Final torque is pretty high on those fasteners. So here is the beefed up, improved Moog versus the factory Subaru. As you can see, we've got grease fittings top and bottom, and it's a much thicker, heavier duty sway bar end link. Does that mean it's better than the factory part? Not necessarily. Does it mean it's going to last longer than the factory part? Not necessarily. But there is an important note on here that our top grease fitting, this one, should point to the rear. So we have to install in this orientation right here. Just push the control arm down to get that stud in, and then line that stud up like so. So one thing, Moog, please make these a 14mm nut. Why did you make them a 15? There's no 15s on Japanese vehicles. So now I gotta go get a 15mm socket. And what's with these holding nuts here? They're not a 17 or a 19, which are Japanese sizes. They're an 18mm. Come on, Moog, you can do better than that. So with everything mechanical and everything in life, there is a torque specification, but being this is an aftermarket part with different fasteners, we're going by German torque specs and getting it good and tight. So that set, we can go ahead and bring the spindle back in. We've already installed the new ball joint. As I said, we talked about that in the Astro Subaru ball joint puller video. And we'll go ahead and put this front suspension back together. And basically from there, all we gotta do is put the rear sway bar end links on and get 4 tires for this car, and it's basically ready for sale. All right, tie rod's torqued, ball joints torqued, new cotter pin installed on both. Now we can get a floor jack out here, jack up under the lower control arm, put the full weight of the vehicle on the suspension, and torque those control arm bolts. All right, car is just coming off the jack stand, so full weight of the car is on the suspension. It's loaded. We can go ahead and start torquing the control arm. 150 Newton meters on the rear bolts. .110 Newton meters on that 19 millimeter nut. And I believe 95 Newton meters on the 17 millimeter bolt nut up front. And yes, I do have the offset set since I'm using a torque adapter. Now that that's all torqued, we can let the suspension back out, let the jack down, let the car back on the jack stand, install the brakes and wheel. Okay, razzle dazzle, it's daytime now. We had technical difficulties last night. I ran out here till 10 o'clock at night due to this caliper bracket being monkeyed with and the bolts being stripped and, you know, unpleasantness. It's always fun going behind an amateur or, you know, someone that don't know what they're doing. So go ahead and put a punch or a screwdriver in between the caliper slot and the slots of the rotor, and we're going to torque our CV axle nut to 220 Newton meters. This is critical. Don't impact them on there because this preloads the wheel bearing. I see a lot of wheel bearing failures due to people not properly torquing the CV axle nut and just running it in with an impact. 220 Newton meters. And take you a punch and a hammer and stake it. And you're basically all set to put the wheel back on. All right, logs to 120 Newton meters.